An hour that we've listened to you, in my view, is a serious indictment against the Justin Trudeau government. And the concerns regarding the culture of fear is extremely disturbing for the professional public servants. That has expanded under Justin Trudeau by 40%. 2015, he promised to cut back on external consultants, yet for the fiscal year of last year, Ottawa spent $15.7 billion on external consultants, totally bypassing the professional public service, an 88% increase. So I wanted to raise that as a concern. Now, sir, based on your years of experience in financial matters, accounts from your members, the RCMP commissioner testifying they are investigating ArriveCan, the AG report, PSPC officials claiming they are sufficiently suspicious of criminal activity surrounding the ArriveCan procurement process, documented evidence of forgery and potential fraud, and the mountain of media reporting. Sir, do you believe, in light of everything that I have presented to you, and I'm sure that you have been listening to and reading on your own, do you believe that there is a strong element of criminal wrongdoing in the ArriveCan?
I unfortunately couldn't comment on that. It's not my area of expertise. I can tell you, based on the findings of the Auditor General, there was a clear lack of respect of the financial framework that's put in place.
Do you believe, and have you had any particular direct communication with the ministers responsible for the memberships that you represent?
No.
Okay. Now, you've also read in the newspaper about Mr. Yeo, one of the principals of Dalian, who not only was gainfully employed as a member of Department of National Defense, but also as a subcontractor. And in this particular case, Mr. Yeo and the other company that he's affiliated with, Daliex, are responsible of receiving upwards to $40 to $50 million in taxpayer funds. Another two-person company, much like GC Strategies. The ability to moonlight as a member of the public service and yet being accused of fleecing the taxpayers at the same time, do you believe that's an isolated incident in the public service?
I would believe so, yes.
You've not heard of any other accounts of this happening?
Not to my knowledge. Now, that's not to say it doesn't exist. Look, if basic due diligence could easily pick this up. As a public servant, you have a code of conduct. There's certain things you're not supposed to do. We have rules in place. We have controls in place to prevent this from happening.
What are your thoughts on ministerial accountability? Because all I've been hearing so far is the minister is completely oblivious. There's a raging firestorm happening in the ministry, and there's a plausible deniability. No one told me, or I didn't bother to ask. How do you feel about ministerial responsibility with this particular scam?
Ministerial responsibility is something that's important. It's something that, like, even at the deputy levels, the buck stops department by department. We need someone who's accountable, right? But organizations such as, like, for example, PSPC, ESDC, and D&D, we're talking about hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. This is very difficult for one person to be at the top. That's why we need financial officers to do their job of due diligence, financial stewardship, to protect these deputy ministers in order for it to allow them to do their job. You can't have one person that's verifying every single transaction, right? Due diligence is important, and our members can help specifically with that task to ensure that the taxpayers' money is being not only accounted for, but being well spent.
Do you think it's a function of incompetence at the deputy ministerial level, or is there an active attempt by ministers to shield themselves from this raging firestorm of fleecing the taxpayer?
I couldn't speak to that, unfortunately. I wouldn't know.
All right. How much time do I have?
20 seconds.
20 seconds. All right. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I want to say, Mr. Richard, how much I appreciate your testimony here and your obvious dedication and able representation of your members regarding what I would call a professional code of conduct. Can you speak to that? Are your members, you mentioned some of the designations, what are some of the ethical and professional standards that they must adhere to?
Well, generally speaking, every public servant adheres to the code of conduct. For our members, however, those that have certain designations, the bar is a bit higher. So I'll give an example. If you see something wrong that you didn't do anything wrong, right? You're witness to something. As if you're performing an audit, if you're an invoice was paid, you detect an anomaly, and you see like something doesn't pass the smell test, you have a duty to report this. The challenge with this is, even though you haven't done anything wrong, you're just doing your job, there could be consequences to you personally. So our members are faced with this situation. I know that ethically I have to report this. How do I do this without committing career suicide? How do I do the right thing that I know I'm supposed to do, that I have to do? However, I need to manage my career. And this is where it's one of the most difficult things, difficult conversations I have to have with my members, when unfortunately I have to let them know, look, you've done nothing wrong. We need to report this. Report it to your supervisor, to whoever you want. However, we need to make sure we document it. Because if ever there is something that happens, there's a scandal, we need to be able to show that you did the right thing, you raised this with management. So
Can I ask you about that, Mr. Richard? Like, what kind of documentation would be recommended in this case? And I say that knowing that, of course, we have the Auditor General's report, we have the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman report. I would think that members of your union who would have been involved in the processes that were under study would have been interviewed, would have been met with. What kind of records would they have been able to provide? And indeed, why not provide them before an audit takes place? Why not channel those concerns and recommendations directly to the Auditor General's office or the procurement ombudsman?
It's unfortunately a matter of them not being protected. So again, they have to do the right thing, which is to flag it to the employer. If there's an anomaly, if there's suspicion of it doesn't pass the acid test, what can we need to flag it? Once you've flagged it, we always tell our members, document it. Because it's not what about you know, it's what you can prove.
What does document look like? Is it like
Could be an email, simple as email.
A report?
I'll give an example. We've told our members in the past, a consultant was hired. We've seen amounts completely changed, conclusions to reports, complete 180s. That doesn't make any sense. And we tell our members, send an email raising your concerns, document them. This way, at least the balls and the employers, you are protected.
Where is that email sent to? It's sent to a supervisor?
Anyone that is under managerial responsibilities. So it could be a director, senior leader, it could be a CFO, it could be a direct supervisor. The moment that we inform the employer of our findings, it puts our members, it reduces the risk for them because they flagged what they saw. They informed their appropriate chain of command of the anomalies or the discrepancies that they saw.
That they observed. And I'm going to ask you this. Of course, you testified already, and we know many employees were working from home. Could there have been better oversight if employees were working from the office? Would this have made any difference to this reporting mechanism? Or indeed to, the kind of interactions that we have physically in an office? Hey, by the way, did you see that project? What's going on there, kind of thing?
From our members' standpoint, we deal with proof and evidence, right? Anything that happens needs to have a paper trail. So I can only speak from our member standpoint because everything either goes through an email, an invoice. There's always a paper or electronic trail. So it wouldn't make any difference from my member's standpoint because we need to substantiate whatever it is the document or the invoice is.
And coming back then to the workforce, it's really critical that we do have that kind of financial record keeping happening and indeed oversight. It's the question that we had for the PSPC regarding the task authorizations and so on. How come somebody didn't catch that? We've seen that the
Your question,
public
Ms.
service
Shanahan.
was dramatically cut back under the Harper government when Pierre Poilievre was
Your
Minister
question,
of
please, Ms. Shanahan.
Employment.
You're way over your time.
Do you worry about cuts like these coming back and what that would mean for accountability and transparency?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Madame Sécla-Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Ndegali, 2.5 minutes. I would like to come back to my previous line of questioning. Yes, you said internal controls generally work well, but we are learning through the Auditor General that there are cases where processes at the CBSC were not followed up or supervised. Same thing at the PHAC and PSPC. To what extent is the case of Arif Khan, which was well scrutinized, is just an outlier? I can't really speak. Generally speaking, if internal controls are well used and respected, there's no problem. It's when we try to do things quickly and it is put aside that we put ourselves at risk. But I have no information to allow me to tell you that what the details were. I didn't ask you for a figure. I imagine that you receive complaints, that you received some complaints recently from CBSA employees, personal complaints, staff complaints. I imagine that you received similar complaints. Not only over the past few weeks did you see such complaints. Yes? Let me give you an example. In the Financial Administration Act, there's Section 34, which states that when we receive a bill or invoice from a consultant or vendor, we need to be able to certify that the service was rendered. So you check. When we receive invoices, and for services, it's more difficult. But is it $10 million of service or $100,000 worth of service? So this opens the door to fraud. Now, to answer your question, as to members who raise complaints or express fears about what they see, yes, this happens. Does it mean that there was necessarily fraud? Not necessarily. Maybe we just need more controls. We can't simply conclude that fraud is happening. What I can say is that sometimes abnormalities are pointed out. Thank you, Mr. Gillian.
Half minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Mr. Richard, you have just said you are afraid concerning the possibilities of cuts. As we see, conservatives were voting more than 100 times that they should be cut, 120 times that they should be cuts in several services and programs. In terms of cuts that affect your members, what are we losing? And I'm talking about the experience that they have, the education they have. On average, how many years of experience do your members have? How many years have they spent in the public service generally? And what do we lose if the Conservatives came back to power and continue to apply cuts as we saw them vote in December? Now, let's look at governance. Reviewing expenditure is a good practice. It's good to see whether the expenses we're incurring are still a good investment. So it's a good practice to see where we are investing our money. Now, to talk about 2.5%, 5%, 10% cuts without looking at items case by case to find out where they should be cut or not. Well, for our members, each dollar invested in an auditor or financial officer gives you a return on investment. For most of our workers, they are accountants, so they have a first degree,